Coming up on this episode of the Real Lives podcast.
And then, the last week we just completely and utterly ran out of money. And so we ended up, raiding bins in the backs of supermarkets, finding stuff that had been thrown away. And it's okay to have a bad day. Everyone has a bad day. Doesn't matter what you're doing. You're going to get a day where everything's not lining up right, weather's not right, that sort of thing. Your feet are sore, you spilt your tea in the morning. That's fine. But if you start getting it progressively going lower, then that's going to become a problem at some point later on. I would hate to go back to New Zealand now and see the change, because I was there in 2008 and things will be very different now to what they were then. And I've noticed it particularly in Patagonia, where I return back and forth a lot. The very first hitch I ever had, which was quite amusing, was in the back of a pickup truck with a big pig.
On today's episode of the Real Lives podcast, I'm excited to have on Will Copestake. Will is an adventurer from up in Scotland, and he has done many of expeditions, some of the most interesting that I've seen. From hiking all of the Munros up in Scotland to, hiking across Iceland in the space of, I think it was 19 days, kayaking in Patagonia and setting up his own company, backpacking across New Zealand, and obviously splitting his time now between half the year in Patagonia and half the year in Scotland. And in this episode, we obviously get into all of that, and we also discuss things such as like how travel has changed over the years from when he first started going when he was 18, 19, and how the prices have increased significantly, and also like what you can do as beginner travelers if you're looking to get into those kind of expeditions and things like that. So obviously you can find all of Will's links down in the description below, so go and support him where you can. And also if you want to go on one of his tours that he does in Scotland or Patagonia, then feel free to go to his website and you can probably find the links to that there. I hope you enjoy this episode with Will. Will, welcome onto the podcast. Appreciate you coming on, appreciate your time. I start the same with every guest that I have on. Tell us who you are and what you do.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm Will Copestake. I run a sea kayaking company in the northwest of Scotland, and I'm probably best known for my big adventure in Scotland back in 2013-14, where I kayaked around the country solo and then climbed all the Munro Mountains, mostly in winter. Since then, I bounced back and forth between Scotland and Patagonia, leading trips and running kayaking trips around the world.
Amazing. Can't wait to get onto the part about Patagonia, because it's one of the places that I've always wanted to visit and I've not got the chance to yet. I've obviously got many years left to do that, but I want to get onto that at some point. But I want to go back to the beginning and just sort of start with what drew you to this life of adventure that you now pursue.
So I think it's more kind of, I'm a product of my surroundings. So I live in Ullapool, which is a small town in the northwest of Scotland, and the culture in my family and around my friends up here was going camping for the weekend or sailing or paddling or walking was just kind of a normal part of daily life. Obviously, you're not doing it every day, but it wasn't an unusual thing to do on the weekend or an unusual pastime. And slowly, little by little, the more you do, the more comfortable you get with it. And as you get past being a teenager, you then start looking at greater horizons and start thinking, where can I go? What can I push myself to? And that evolves over time. And for me, that's been really fortunate. It developed into a career in the outdoors. I ended up doing a degree in environmental science and outdoor education. And that then led on to meeting friends, doing expeditions, and built into me running my own company up here in Scotland.
What led you to why did you go to university then? Because you take me as one of from what the conversations I've heard of you and also the things I've read about you, you don't take me as the kind of person that would enjoy the typical university route, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think, like everyone, really, I finished high school. Certainly the kind of culture at that point around my, again, friends and family was that it's good to get a degree. I'm not entirely sure I agree with that now in adult life, but I don't regret it at all. But most of the most intelligent people I know were out with going to university, practically intelligent folk up here. I think for me, I sort of put that in the bank with the idea of going into the science fields. Initially, I thought I'd go into a science background. And before I went there, I then went off on a gap year to New Zealand. And that's where I really fell in love with the outdoor work and the outdoor environment, and thought that then I'd probably put my focus into that. But going through a sort of science, it was a science combined with outdoor education degree, and so that gave me the open door that if I wanted to go down that field, that was always an option. And I think ultimately leads to a greater understanding of what you're exploring.
Do you think that what you did at university then has had some effect on the way you do things now, or is it still, even though it isn't obviously an environmental based degree, do you think it's just not had any impact on anything you've done?
No, I mean, I think it's had a great impact. Funnily enough, I was actually talking to someone literally last night who emailed asking about going to university or whether or not to go through a HNC or an apprenticeship scheme to go into the outdoor industry. And I was very difficult to give a good answer. For me, it worked out really well. Part of that was to do with the way it taught you to think. It teaches you a very analytic way of thinking and around the kind of course content. But I'm also aware that course content I could have probably learned much quicker if I went and did an apprenticeship or followed on with an outdoor centre or something on those lines. What really benefited me there was the people I met and what I did with them. And so I met some really good friends who were like-minded. And that put me into the expedition in Iceland that then ultimately led me wanting to do more. And so it's probably as much the people I met and what I did out with the university is what led me into where I am now than the degree itself, if that makes sense. And I think it doesn't really matter what you do with that. It's what you do around it. But I know an awful lot of people in the outdoor industry who didn't go that route and went straight into apprenticeships or following HNCs, and they've got fantastic careers, so it's totally doable.
Yeah, I think the one of the main benefits of university, what I found, was that you have a lot of time on your hands, so you have time to go and try new things, try new hobbies, meet new people, all those kind of things. And I think when you jump straight into apprenticeships, you kind of miss that part of your life. You never really get that back, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I mean, certainly we were very fortunate with our university. We had 3-month-long summer holidays. And in some of those years, we could use those really well. Like I say, we went to Iceland in one of them and did a big expedition there. And many of the others, you went climbing hills or obviously summer jobs as well. I mean, let's face it, students don't have much money. But yeah, it allows you to do more around it. But yeah, I think if you do go through more of an apprenticeship, you're kind of much more task focused. You're more likely to go sort of straight out of that into an outdoor centre or into following someone else in a company and build from there.
Yeah. So let's go on to your trip to New Zealand. Obviously, you were 18 years old when you started that trip. What was the plan when you were going into that? Was that to go and just do a working holiday and just sort of see if life on the other side was going to be, the grass would be greener kind of thing? Or was it solely to go and explore and adventure sort of that South Island of New Zealand?
Yeah, so I'll be totally honest, I really didn't know what I was doing when I went out there. I'd saved up a little bit of money through summer jobs through high school and really jumped out there, A, because some friends were there, B, because I had a relative out there, and C, because it seemed like a fairly easy starting country. It's English speaking, good hiking networks, relatively easy to get summer work. And I turned up there with the idea that I was going to do some hiking, but really didn't know what I was going to do. Being there for 10 months, that fell into them falling in love with their great walks network. They've got a really good system of national walks. And started going through one of them, then another one, and thought, actually, maybe this is what I'm going to do over 10 months. And then combine that with working a little bit for the Department of Conservation, their equivalent of like the Forestry Service and the park authorities, and odd jobs here and there. But really fell in love with hiking and hitchhiking. Really, really enjoyed hitchhiking there.
Do you have any fun stories from hitchhiking? Because I've done it a couple of times myself and I've been in some weird and wonderful situations through the process of it.
Yeah, so I mean, I've had everything from highs to lows. I've hitchhiked probably thousands of times now in Scotland, Iceland, New Zealand. The very first hitch I ever had, which was quite amusing, was in the back of a pickup truck with a big pig. And I'd gone for a walk out of town and walked far further than I expected. And just thought, you know what, I'll put my thumb out. And this farmer just chucked me in the back with his pigs. I've been invited into people's houses. A really funny one in Iceland. We got invited into this chap's house, quite an old fellow. And he left me and my mate in his house. And within about 5 minutes, he went, oh, right, I'm off to work. Keys in the front door. see ya. I just left us at his house, having basically just met us, which was kind of great.
Yeah, that's
never
some
really
real
any
trusting behaviour. That I don't think I could quite do that around here.
Yeah, right. But I've never really had that many bad experiences. A couple of drunk drivers maybe, but nothing that's really been concerning. I did once hitchhike with a guy with no arms. That was strange.
That's interesting.
Which that wasn't the weird bit. The weird bit was that he was able to smoke while driving a manual car, while driving way over the speed limit, which was kind of incredible and equally terrifying.
How on earth does that? Did that even work? I bet you were sort of fearing for your life. He'd lived in the car.
Yeah, I mean, he'd lived his whole life without having arms, and he was just completely mobile with it. And yeah, really nice fellow. Actually, he ended up giving us a tour of the town. We stayed at his house. He was a really nice guy.
Oh, I love that. Absolutely love it. So, getting back to New Zealand, you were there for, obviously, you said 10 months. So, how long of that did you spend hiking through, obviously, all these incredible walks that they have there?
It was a majority of it, yeah. So, you would go out for kind of 5 days to a week at a time, and then come back, and then you probably do about the same kind of in town or working. There's a couple of months I just did solid work with Department of Conservation. And there was quite a lot just kind of hitchhiking about and bumming about, to be honest. I mean, sort of aimlessly travelling. And I quite like that, the ability to just wake up one morning and go, right, I'll put my thumb out, I'll see where I end up. I'm vaguely going to go south or west, and we'll see where we go. And then when you get there, go, right, what hills are in the area, what paths are in the area, let's go see what we can do.
So did you spend a lot of your time then camping, I'm guessing?
Yeah, a lot of time camping. I pretty quickly blew most of the money I'd saved on youth hostels, and then there was a lot of camping out around that after that.
That's the first thing I noticed. So I moved over to Melbourne about a year and a bit ago, and the first thing I noticed is how expensive accommodation and food, everything is obviously a lot more expensive, but especially hostels and hotels are just through the roof.
Yeah, I think actually I've noticed it. I would hate to go back to New Zealand now and see the change, because I was there in 2008 and things will be very different now to what they were then. And I've noticed it particularly in Patagonia, where I return back and forth a lot. But when I first went down to Chile, you could do things really on a shoestring, and you had a lot of people like I had been in New Zealand, really green to the outdoor sort of solo hiking and traveling. Not much experience, not much money, and they were just kind of going down on a shoestring and figuring it out. Now that's really changed. It's much more expensive. You've got to book lots in advance, pay lots of money, pay lots of visas and fees and hidden costs. And it's changed that dynamic there now. There's a lot less of those kind of young students and much more working professionals now. Which I think it'd be very much harder if you're kind of young and going out to travel now. But there are still places you can do that. A lot of them are quite wild, which is quite cool.
Yeah. So when you got back from New Zealand to Scotland to go to university, did you struggle with that feeling of being stuck after spending obviously a lot of time being free, being able to go hiking, doing whatever, camp wherever, and then all of a sudden now you're in a bit of a routine, you've got university through the week and obviously probably working as well on the side of that?
Yes, I think I was quite lucky in that respect, in that I came back and went absolutely straight into university. And so it was one new experience going straight into the next new experience. And because it was still a vaguely outdoor-based degree, that momentum kept going pretty quickly. And so there wasn't that much chance for that post-expedition blues that you occasionally get. I think the only time I have really badly had that was actually the trip we did mid-university with my friend in Iceland, where we ended up getting quite ill towards the end of it, and we did complete what we went out to do, but we ended up the last 2 weeks completely running out of money. I mean, literally going into the backs of bins around supermarkets and sort of scavenging stuff. And we ended up, just kind of not doing much that last week to 10 days, and that really ended up with post-expedition blues. Much in the same way I find when lockdown happened, a lot of people got that. You suddenly go from momentum to nothing, and that's when you start having issues.
Yeah. It's a definite struggle. Like when I've been on trips, like the longest trip I've been on is like a traveling, so to speak, would be 2 months, and I found after that, just because of the differences in culture, the differences in routine, and then all of a sudden you come back and you're expected to get back into this almost 9 to 5 routine. I was just
totally
lost for months.
Yeah, and it could be quite an interesting sort of process to go through that. I found it really interesting post COVID lockdowns, because I used to find you often trying to describe post expedition blues, which is unusual for folk who haven't experienced that sort of post holiday mood change. But actually, when lockdown happened, an awful lot of people got that for the first time in their lives. Suddenly you got a complete change in momentum, and it affects you in many different ways. Some people get busy, some people wallow in it. It depends very much kind of how you use your time as to how you come out of it, I think.
Yeah. So let's get onto this trip of you crossing Iceland, because I think it's a really interesting one to do. And also I love the story that I've heard of how you made your money to go and do it and how you were funding it. So if you could just get into that and sort of tell the story from start to end, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I'll start kind of from scratch there. When I was in my university course, there was a group of about 15 of us to start with, and we were studying in the outdoor education part as well as the environmental science. So it was quite a small congregate group. And there was one guy in that called Remy McMurtry, who ended up being a really close friend of mine, still is a really close friend of mine. And we had similar experience at that point, and we started doing loads of hills together. Now, we ended up being flatmates, and in our second year of university decided we wanted to do something big and do something overseas. Now, Remy had done an awful lot in the Alps and Europe, and I'd done stuff in New Zealand, and so we kind of ruled those two areas out. And we debated between Iceland, Scandinavia, maybe the States. Scandinavia and States were too expensive to get to, and so Iceland became the kind of one that had cheaper flights that we could go to and something we could do on a student budget. Initially, we planned that we would just go there and explore and climb some mountains, and then we got the map out and started drawing dots between things, and realised actually you could walk from the south to the north right through the centre, which would take about a month, and that would be quite a fun trip to do, and a step up from what we'd done already, a little bit wilder, a little bit more remote, but yet reasonably accessible to do in the summer given the experience we had. It was the same price to buy a flight 3 months apart, so the duration of our summer holidays, as it was for 1 month. And so we thought, stuff it, we'll just go for 3 months and we'll do the month hike, and then we'll climb some hills and do some exploring and just kind of spend some time out there. The limiting factor obviously was budget. We did both earn a little bit through summer jobs, but we topped that income up by the semester before our trip. We would carry water up to the top of a hill behind the university, which is called Demayet. Now, Demayet, it's quite a small hill, 400 or 500 metres or so, but it's one of the most hiked hills in the country because it's really accessible from the town. And so you'd hike the water up, which counted as our training, and then we'd sit there pretending to revise and sell cups of tea and coffee. And you made pretty good money for it. I mean, we were making anywhere between £70 and £100 a day, just sat on the top selling cups of teas and coffees to folk. Which I believe, for a legal standpoint, you can only do with suggested donation. It can't actually be charging, but it works. And so we ended up we set off to Iceland. We had a budget of about £1,000 or less. I think it was actually slightly less, and that was to last us for 3 months. Now obviously you're not spending much if you're hitchhiking and hiking, so that was really food and fuel.
So I'm guessing it was a lot more expensive than what you anticipated when you got out there.
Yeah, so I mean, we budgeted and we did do some research online and kind of found what our food costs would be. The actual crossing, we'd managed to source a really good deal with Expedition Foods, and they'd given us a really good price on freeze-dried meals for that. And then so the other 2 months around it, we basically ate pasta. I think we did 11 days straight of smashed potato with cuppa soups.
Nice.
Yeah, we did all sorts of really budget foods like that. And then the last week we just completely and utterly ran out of money, and so we ended up raiding bins in the backs of supermarkets, finding stuff that had been thrown away, and the last 2 days basically just drank the unlimited free tubs of coffee in the airport.
Did that cause any conflict between the two of you, as being at a point where you obviously don't have any money to buy food and you're sort of struggling to get by? Were you, or were you absolutely like sort of you were both on a level and sort of knew that this is just what we've got to do?
I think we were both kind of happy on it. I mean, both Remy and I at that point in our lives both got a little bit of a kick out of being dirtbags. I think it's fair to say. So like there was something kind of weirdly fun about it in a sort of type 2 sort of way. The slight challenge we had is that, yeah, totally. The bigger challenge we had was actually Remy is anaphylactic allergic to dairy, eggs, and nuts, and so that massively limits what you could eat. And so we were quite often having to work around that as well, which was fun. No, the only thing that really was
while
doing
some digging while doing that causes some problems.
No, like I say, it wasn't too bad. The bigger problems we had was actually on the crossing where we lost a tent in the middle. So one of our tents, Remy's tent, completely split in half to do with the conditions and the ash. And so for the remaining 7 weeks of our trip out there, we actually shared a 1-person tent, which was quite cosy. And so really kind of top and tail spooning most of the time. I'll tell you what though, when you get back to university and you've got a whole flat between you, it feels real big after that.
Yeah, I bet you feel like you're living like a king after that, don't you?
It was amazing. It was amazing.
Yeah, so on that trip took you 27 days, didn't it? In the end.
Yeah, so the hiking was 27 days.
So that trip across, how long were you aiming to do that in, and how did you go about planning that route to get there?
So at the time, you broke it down into 4 different legs. So from the coast up until day 4, you're actually on a road, and it's not particularly exciting hiking. And so that logistically is quite easy. You can just kind of pick stuff up at shops and things if you need extra food. Once you start going into the inland, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated because you get a lot further away from any resupply points. There were 2 points in the centre, which are remote outposts at the end of very, very popular hiking trails. So Landmannalagar, which is at the end of a very famous hiking trail called the Lågavega Trail, which we joined for the first 5 days in from the road. Then we ended up doing that in 3, so we actually ended up staying there a couple of days and exploring the area. Beautiful place, big rhyolite cliffs and volcanoes and everything you want in Iceland, very really nice. Big geysers and vents. That area, there was a car that went in, so we had a resupply sent to that. And similarly, 12 days later, we had one at the next hut and then a village about a week after that.
So over the years that you've obviously been on these long expeditions and things like that, how's your approach changed to planning these kind of trips?
It's probably got a little bit more refined. I don't think I've ever planned a trip quite as in-depth as that Iceland trip or perhaps the Scotland trip. And that is directly correlated to the fact that I was supposed to be doing my dissertations at university. And so anything other than that is way more interesting. So you put so much energy into it. What I learned from those trips is that you can plan to the nth degree and you can plan sort of your exact route per day and all this sort of thing. But then one thing changes and that whole thing shuffles off course. And so rather than then I would kind of focus on things where you plan it day by day by day by day. Now I will plan everything based on an average pace. And so, for example, the trips I do in Chile, I know I do an average pace of about 28 to 30 kilometers a day from experience there. And so I plan everything on 25k a day. And then I add a 10% window on top of that. So even on the lower average, I know I'm going to beat that. And it's quite regular that you'll do a 50 kilometer day. So you do a day like that, you've gained a day off. Adding that extra 10% gives that extra window again. Each day you're getting a little bit more of a window that if you get a bad weather window, you don't have the pressure to go out in conditions that you shouldn't go out in. Now, particularly in water sports, that's a really useful thing to have in your side. If you've got time on your side, you can make much safer decisions. Same when you're going up into winter mountains. And I would say really for anything that you're doing, if you have time, you're much less stressed. the Iceland and that kind of first Scotland trip, the planning I did, like I say, was super, super detailed. And we did focus on things like what our evacuation points were going to be, our food rationing, sort of calorific intake per day of your food, all your kind of emergency things, how you're going to deal with broken tents and broken stuff. And we focused a lot on the first Iceland trip on weight reduction. I literally shaved loads of stuff off bags and cut straps off and all this sort of thing. Probably saved about the weight of one chocolate bar. But for us, that kind of felt mentally like you were doing something then. Whereas now I'll kind of plan a little bit more on the whole of things, and then focus on the planning for what if something breaks, what if you break, how can I get out, how can I fix it, if you can't, what can you do?
Yeah. What are some of the toughest mental challenges you've had to face as a result of some of these expeditions?
I'll preface this quite interestingly. On all those trips I've done, I take a diary daily, and I rate my mood out of 10. And so 10 out of 10 is the best day ever, going to be the memory forever. 1 out of 10 is I'd rather forget that day. On average, I'll sit about an 8 out of 10. So generally, I'm fairly positive on expeditions. And by doing that in your calendar, you can watch if your mood is dropping or rising. It's okay to have a bad day. Everyone has a bad day. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're going to get a day where everything's not lining up right, weather's not right, that sort of thing. Your feet are sore, you spilt your tea in the morning. That's fine. But if you start getting it progressively going lower, then that's going to become a problem at some point later on. I would say the same for sort of general life too. I mean, if your mood starts to sump permanently, then you need to change something. The biggest challenges I've personally found have been when you've gone into those long mood dips, and that's normally related to long periods of solo travel, long periods of bad weather, personal injuries, lots of little things adding up like that. Not getting enough food, not getting enough sleep, that sort of thing.
Do you find that you much prefer to travel with other people then, I'm guessing? Not because I've met a few people who they absolutely they love the solitude of being alone, whereas obviously there's some people which I can imagine like yourself who do love to be with others.
Yeah, I like both. So I really enjoy going on an independent trip. I mean, the Scotland trip for me was predominantly on my own, and that for me I think was pretty life-changing. I really enjoyed that, being out there totally under your own pace, timings, devices. But I have noticed that generally you are about a point happier on your mood on average if you've got somebody else to share that with. What happens is that when your mood's dropping, it's very rare that theirs drops at the same pace, and you end up picking each other back up again. That really helped on this last trip where we were unexpectedly denied permits to get to the end goal of the trip we wanted to do, completely out with our control. And obviously that really affected our mood through about 50% of that trip. And there was quite a lot of anger and frustration bubbled under the surface there. But we managed to put a positive on it, and both of us sort of kept happy and made light humour about cussing them out between us, and you could kind of hold your mood up. Whereas I think if you're on your own, that would have spiralled pretty dark.
Yeah, it's about like I spoke to a guy, Leon Bustin, who's an ultra runner, and he, like, obviously a lot of people say, but he was saying about controlling the controllables. If it's something that's out of your control, there's nothing you can do, and there's no point getting worked up about it. But it's obviously very easy to say that, but when you can actually learn to just let the uncontrollables go, life does get a lot better when you can just forget them.
Yeah, and if that comes up later on, then it's okay to get that out later on. But if you've got something that needs done now, that can wait. And I'm not a massive believer of bubbling something up forever, but if you've got something like that, then you can work through it until you have the time, space, and area to process that, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely having a friend or a buddy out there definitely makes that mood a little happier.
So, traveling alone, what's the one main thing that you've learned about yourself through those solo trips?
That's a good question. I've known I'm pretty blooded minded. There's a lot of times. for the Munro mission, for example, the kayaking side I actually enjoyed on the whole. There was a few moments where you're very scared with conditions get out of control, but because you're on the sea and the sea is pretty unrelenting when it gets to conditions that are like that, you're so focused on surviving out of it, you don't really have the chance to mentally process that. Whereas if you're in a hill environment or mountain environment, for me the Cairngorms were the most difficult bit. Extreme Arctic conditions in the top. I had a really bad snow year, total whiteouts, really strong winds, literally spending your day and night counting your footsteps and changing compass bearings and just seeing white and nothing all day, or black and nothing as the night falls. And that over time starts to really weigh on your mind. Now for me there was about 3 months of that where I was having sleep paralysis dreams every night, and so literally mentally dropping, which was quite amazing. But at no point did I really feel like I was going to permanently quit that. There were days that I said, no, I really don't want to go up there. But there was never a point where I felt like quitting, which was quite sort of empowering in a way. And that yeah, I've definitely kind of taken that on further on in life.
Yeah. So that trip itself, obviously, it was 364 days, and you spent the majority of that on your own. So how long did you plan to spend on this trip, and what was the purpose of it?
So yeah, good question. So the purpose of the trip was, after university, I wanted to do another trip like Iceland. I really enjoyed Iceland with Remy. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed what we experienced there. And I wanted to do something a little bit bigger and a little bit longer, and also wanted to do something in a kayak, because kayaking is my first passion as a sport, and I'd never really done any journeys with it. The idea of going around the coast of Scotland by kayak is it follows what was the original highway. So before roads, everyone went around by sea, and so you have an awful lot of the Scottish culture fringing the coast. And by doing that, I would really familiarise myself with an awful lot of Scotland that I'd never been to. I would get to see some coast, I'd get to improve my paddling, and just explore a lot of Scotland that was new to me. A lot of my degree was very centralised on trying to get your mountain leader qualification. That was the kind of end goal of the outdoor education side, the summer mountain leadership. And so I also wanted to tackle something hill-based, and the logical progression was to try and do a round of the Munros. Initially, that plan had been to do the Munros via kayak and paddle and run into them. But once I started planning that, realised that would just be a complete logistical nightmare. And so broke it into 2 stages. The kayaking side, well, I did tackle a few. I did about 20 odd as I paddled past the Skye Coolin, Ben Hope, a couple in Noida, the ones that make sense as you pass, and Mull. And then the inland bit then became more of a winter journey. Now, Remy and I both really enjoyed doing winter mountains, winter Munros. We were very familiar with winter navigation, much more familiar with winter hill skills. And so that bit for me was really more familiar than the paddling side. By combining the both, you got a really good gauge of Scotland. You get the outside edge and you get the inside bit. I planned it to be 8 months. The kayaking side took about the time I thought it was going to take. A little bit longer perhaps because of weather windows, and I had to go and graduate and things like that. I did have a couple of jump outs where I went and did some adult things. And some not very adult things. I went and jumped into a canyon on a canyon swing for a weekend and things like that. We just go and have some fun. You know, you get opportunities. You sometimes it's hard to say no.
Have to take them.
Got to do it. The Munro side of things took a lot longer. I was lucky with my summer. I got a relatively good summer weather window. The winter was one of the worst, windiest, coldest winters in about 60 years. And that was brutal, especially doing that by a tent. And so that slowed me down significantly. Just by coincidence, it took a year.
Well, 1 day less than a year, just. Got it.
I was going to make that. I was going to make that date.
Yeah. So what I'm interested in as well, because obviously for that trip you won UK and Scottish Adventurer of the Year. So, what did you ever expect to win that? And also, how did you find out that this award was coming to you that year?
So short answer, I'd actually never heard of it until I knew I was nominated. So somebody nominated me. Thank you, whoever you are. I don't know who it was. I found out I was nominated while working in Patagonia. So on the back of that expedition, I got given the opportunity to go and kayak guide in Chile. And the ceremony where I ended up winning it, I was actually in a bar with a friend from Ireland in Chile, and we found out I'd won the Scottish one and started celebrating, at which point the power went out. I didn't actually know I'd won the other one until the next morning, so we went straight back out again. But no, it was a nice surprise, but it was never the end goal. The end goal was really just to go and explore.
Yeah. So obviously you said there that you got the opportunity to go to Chile and do some guiding there. What was that like initially, moving obviously away from family, away from friends, and going into such a remote area of the world and starting a job like that?
It didn't feel like too much of a jump. So it was a big jump. It was the first time I'd gone somewhere I didn't speak the language. Most of the work I'm doing, you're working with Americans there anyway, and it was the sort of learning to speak with the locals that took time, and I'm still terrible at Spanish. But it was kind of a leap of faith in that I had someone that I'd known had worked there a long time ago who'd suggested I got in touch, and I applied to 4 different companies down there, and all of them said no. At that point, I had no kayak guiding qualifications, just on the back of expeditions and my summer mounted leader. 2 weeks before the start date for that season, I was looking into winter, having done my first year freelancing, doing Duke of Edinburgh's, guiding Ben Nevis treks, the kind of standard freelance work. And I got an email saying, we've had a guide dropped out, would you like to come down and guide? And at that point in my life, I was young, single, free. I said, yeah, you know what, I'll go for that, and absolutely fell in love with it.
It looks like such an incredible place, and to do the things you've done there, you know, like kayaking through Patagonia and stuff like that. So how much time do you get on the side of obviously doing these tours and the guiding to go and do your own little expeditions, you know, in between jobs?
So nowadays, if I'm down there for the season, I'm contracted in for about 20 days a month. Now the guy Chris I work with, the company I work with now is called Kayaking Patagonia, and he's brilliant. He really gets it. He gets why you're going there. He gets why you want to be there. And so within that 10 days you've got spare within a month, he normally will try to have at least one window where you've got 3 or 4 days together, which is about the time you need to do anything really interesting there. There's quite a lot of commuting in and out to places. Certainly if you do the kayaking stuff out with the river system, your last day is always going to be a day on a ferry because it's the only way out. And your first day, half of the day is spent driven in. So having that 3 or 4 days allows you to go and climb hills, line into distant lakes, do these more remote adventures. And it's on you if you've got the energy to then use that time. And if you don't want to use that time and you want to go and relax or do something else, then that's fair and square too. The first year I was there, I had a lot less time. And that year was really focused on learning how to guide and being taught by Herman, the chap I worked for then, and the 2 American guides that I worked with for a short amount of time, who were qualified guides, and we kind of shared experience. I taught them expedition skills from what I'd learned, and they really taught me the fundamentals of guiding principles. And that was really the kind of whole focus of the first season. And then after that, I kind of felt more comfortable to go and play.
You have your own guiding business. So is that solely Scottish based, and you go work for someone else in Chile?
Yeah, it's sort of subcontracting if I'm overseas. So the company I work for up here, my company is Kayak Sunrise, and we're predominantly Scotland based. I share the business with a friend who does a lot of canoeing trips, and we do a bit of both. Bit of canoeing, bit of kayaking, bit of hill walking, climbing. Starting to venture a bit more into overseas stuff. So next year we've got a trip into Greenland, which is quite exciting. Potentially doing some stuff in Norway in the future. And then Patagonia, I can run trips through our business, but it's subcontracting through with Chris, who I work with down south.
A question I have as well about your expeditions that you do. How do you train for them in the build up to them? What sort of things are you doing? Are you are you doing a lot of cardio based things? Are you doing any weight training? Are you is it all a bit mixed modal kind of thing that you're doing?
So the only trip I've ever really properly trained for was Iceland, and that we trained for again by lifting bottles of water up the hill to sell them. But we spent a lot of time going up and down staircases. I've never really been a gym person, so I do a lot of body weight exercise, press ups, pull ups, hangs, that sort of thing. The other trips that I've had, the Scotland one, predominantly the Scotland one, was really I planned the time in to get fit on the job. So because I had that time window, I have a good baseline fitness. And I know that the first 2 weeks you're just going to be a little bit slower. The best way you can train for something is to do the thing you wanted to train for. Now that, in your young 20s, for me, worked perfectly. I wasn't going out to set a record. I wasn't going for speed. It didn't matter if I was not going at the full pace that I had my potential for. As a 33-year-old as of tomorrow, I would look back and tell myself to have stretched a little bit more. Yeah, getting older, feeling it. I would definitely have stretched a little bit more, because it does catch up on you eventually a little bit. And then the Patagonia trips, my training for that really was work. It's a very physical working environment there. You're working in 30 to 40 knot winds. You're towing clients almost on the daily. I'm normally, at the end of the season, working down there about as physically fit as I ever get as a paddler. And so by the time you go into those expeditions, you're really at the top of your game. Seamus, who comes and joins me for those trips, he's a gamekeeper. And so he's doing stalking guiding, fishing guiding, deer hunting. He's on the hill most days, and he's often dragging things about, like dragging deer off the hill, that sort of thing. And so he's got that working environment that's got a good baseline fitness. But you absolutely can train for an expedition by cardio and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah. What are you doing in terms of for recovery? Because obviously it's a very physical job that you do, and to do it for 3-4 months at a time with 10 days off it, but that's still spent going hiking, going kayaking, going doing whatever. So what are you doing to sort of stay on top of recovery and making sure that you're not getting injured and that you're feeling at the best you can for a given day?
So when I was younger, I didn't do that much, if I'm honest. I just kind of muscled through it a little bit, and that does catch up on you. Like you feel invincible when you're younger. I'm talking about this. This was less than a decade ago, but in my first season there, I kind of pushed that a little too far. So I ended up probably breaking a rib. I mean, I snapped a paddle over my chest and ended up really hurting myself. And that led into pneumonia, and I ended up working for a month with increasingly severe pneumonia, and was able to macho and muscle through that. But as soon as I stopped, I was out for 3 months, and I couldn't get up to the kitchen without going down to one knee. I mean, it was absolutely debilitating. And ever since then, have sort of realised that actually you do need to look after yourself. And so it's a very common term in the outdoor industry that you get seasonal burnout. If you overwork yourself and overpush yourself, it's not if, but when your body will just say, that's it, that's enough. And you start losing your ability to effectively do your job properly. And so finding the point and pace for your body, it's different for everyone, where you're able to work to continuously is quite an important skill to develop in the outdoor industry. Now for me, I find 20 days a month actually works okay. It gives you time to rest on those days off if you want to, and in a weird sort of way, doing other things on those days off, like your own personal adventures or going off with your partner or these sort of things. In a weird sort of way, although you're being physically active, they're rest as well, because it's on your terms and you're doing it without having to think about a collective group. Your mental state's in a very different position. And there are a lot of times where you're just relaxing. I mean, yeah, you do. It's okay just to sit in front of the fire and read a book or chill out on social media.
Yeah. Something I want to get onto as well, because I read a recent interview that you did. Well, not recent, sorry. I read one of the interviews that you did, and I wanted to talk about through the lens of the media and how they alter our perceptions of different places around the world. And I've got a quote here that you said, where you said, "Society today is blighted with the media showing the worst of our kind. People are as kind and generous in the most war-torn corners of the world as the most civilized suburbs, perhaps even more so." So I want to hear some of your experiences of that and how you got to that realization of the fact that the media portrays this negative side of the world that actually just isn't true for a lot of it.
Yeah, it's a good point. So a lot of what we read in the news, and I mean, case in point, I've spent my whole day today reading about what's going on in Israel and Palestine, which is horrifying, and no one would want to go experience that and really feel for those people. But you often find, if you scroll through social media and media, you're reading about the worst of the worst, because that's what interests us as people. It draws your attention. A lot of places I've been, a lot of countries, I have this. I've often said that the harsher the climate and the harsher the environment, the friendlier the people are. And it sort of rings true that if you are somewhere where it is hard to get by, be that by weather or condition or whatever's going on in your area, you have to look after each other, and you have to be a civilization, and you have to be a community. And I've found anywhere that I've been, that is generally the case. Most people are really, really lovely. 99.999% of us just want to get along with life and be happy. We're not seeking to be aggressive or angry. Of course those people exist in the world, but most people are lovely, from my experience. And I have a firm belief that every person you have common ground with as well. You can always find common ground with someone.
Oh, 100%. The one thing I realised of how the media affected us was when I moved over to Australia, I just stopped looking at the BBC, GMB, all those things, because I couldn't get them. And I realised actually how much better things were, because we weren't just being fed negative story after negative story after negative story about Iran or what's going on in Syria or something else that's going on in the world that is, it's just, it's a huge problem, don't get me wrong, but we're only seeing the negative side of that place. We're not seeing how families are sticking together in little communities and making sure that everyone's okay and everyone's fed and everyone's got water. And I think moving away from looking at general media, obviously there's a benefit to doing it, but every now and then to learn new things. But I think staying away from it for the most part actually is very beneficial for how you look at the world and also your mental health as well.
Yeah. I mean, I will put my hand up first and say I'm totally bad on sitting on my phone and reading the news and going down that kind of doom scroll and sort of suddenly thinking the world is a horrible place. But it's good to be aware of those things too. I mean, obviously we need to be aware of what's going on in these things, because otherwise you can't drive for change and hopefully improve situations where the situations aren't good. And certainly what is happening around the world just now is not good in a lot of places. It's awful. But there is a lot of good as well. And it's... So I remember someone was describing to always look for the helpers in any situation. Always look for the people helping, because there are people trying to do the best thing.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Yeah.
And then
if there aren't, maybe it's your turn. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that I want to get onto as well now is sort of planning your own adventure. So for those people who are listening who want to, they're thinking of doing their own expedition somewhere and, they're not sure quite how to go about it. What are the 3 or 4 main things that you would say you would recommend doing for those people?
So if you're looking for something to do, I mean, the first thing I would do is pick something. Now that can be anything you want it to be. Be quite aware of your own abilities and where your ambition and ability cross over is where you want to be. if I've never climbed a mountain before, I'm not going to go and do K2 because it's going to end badly. But if you, let's say for example, I'm quite keen on my hill walking and I want to do something long distance. I might look for somewhere that has got a good long distance trail, something that is relatively wild, that is going to push me, but is somewhere that has the opportunity that if it does go wrong, I have options. So I might pick somewhere, let's say like Scandinavia, the UK, or Europe, or somewhere where it might be expensive and you need insurance for it, but help will come if you need it. And plan for that unexpected within your route choice if you're looking for a route as a first route. The more you do these things, the more experienced you'll get and the more aware of your abilities and inabilities you'll get. And then you'll know where you can and can't push on that. Take it step by step on that. It is okay to push yourself a little bit though. I mean, we all want to push ourselves. If you don't push yourselves, you don't learn. And I like to say experience comes just after you needed it. If you go out on these things, make a mistake, if you've got your systems in place that you can come back safe and alive, you will learn from that. And you can bring that with you onto the next trip and the next trip and the next trip. So the first thing I do is pick something appropriate, pick something within your ability but also within your ambition that you can cross over, and be really honest on that. Be quite self-honest on that. I got taught in university, I've actually just written something about that today, funny enough, by a chap called John Cluett, who was one of our mountain instructors, and he used the expression, always have a second plan A. You don't need a plan B. And that is the idea that when you're planning for the unexpected, if something changes and you need to alter your route or alter your plan, you've got equal opportunity plans that are as useful to pick as the one you've got. It might not be that driving ambition that's got you there, but it's a plan that you can take that you know will work. And so a plan B is a lesser plan. You're much less likely to take it if you need it. You're going to go, I don't want to do that. That's not what I've come here for. If I'm going for the summit of a hill and the conditions come in that I am not going to get up there, or more importantly, back from it safely, I might say, you know what, I can do plan B. I can go down through that valley. It's going to be a nice walk out. Maybe there'll be a nice waterfall or something. You know, there's a second good plan A in there. So having a second plan A is always good as well, and plan that into your trips. And that's included for me even in the really remote Patagonia trips. We plan that time window, but you also, and it's required by the Navy there, but you do also have to plan alternative exit routes that can shorten that trip substantially, if you need to, if something is not going to plan that you need to shorten that journey by.
Amazing. Yeah, and then I wanted to ask as well, so you've obviously done these big expeditions that, you know, like the 222 Munros and kayaking through Patagonia and stuff like that. So what now have you got your eyes sort of set on that you want to do as your next big thing?
So yeah, I've got kind of ideas in the bank. I'm getting into that point of life now where I'm unlikely to go off on another massive 6 months adventure unless something really interesting comes up that I can do more than likely with my partner. I'm probably not going to go and do those mega adventures again. I'm at a point now where I've got my business. I'm building my kayaking business, and the adventures I'm doing are a month or 2 months, which are still big adventures. And don't get me wrong, massive adventures. Some of those will be commercial, some of those will be personal. I'm heading out on Friday to go for, I think, 12 days. We're going to cycle, my partner and I, up to the north of Shetland. And that's kind of the annual adventure that I'm quite enjoying now, is these kind of smaller adventures. I do have a big one set on the vaguely near horizon. I'm in the process of setting up how that's going to happen. I would quite like to make it happen, which is down in South Georgia, which is the set of islands a little bit north of the Antarctic Peninsula. Now, my father in the late 70s and early 80s worked there as a scientist, and he as a result, got a mountain named after him, which is about 600-700 meters. It's quite a small mountain, but it's a mountain. Now my dad's never climbed
it's not something you hear every day. That.
Yeah, so he was a product of good fortune there. So the Falklands War started, and they went through, basically going through all the scientists, or the head scientist. He was the base commander at Bird Island, and sort of said, "Do you want something named after you?" And he was fortunate enough that he got a hill after him. I'm now sort of looking into setting up something where I would really like to get him to the top of that mountain, and getting there in the first place will be quite an adventure. Hopefully sailing in. I'd like to involve a bit of kayaking on that, and yeah, get him up that little mountain. There is good scope in there. When it was named for him, it was a much more inaccessible peak than it is now. You had a glacier that came to the sea, blocking off access. That glacier has gone. It has completely receded up into the mountains. And so it is simply a case of landing and going up it now. And so there's quite interesting scope to go and do some comparatives there and see what the changes happened in a pretty short space of time. It'd be quite interesting to do that, I think. But obviously that's the sort of project that is going to need funding and quite serious logistics. So realistically,
it's interesting as well, isn't it? It's interesting how in the space of 40 plus years, a glacier is just that quickly is just gone almost, and how that's obviously then affecting everything else we're doing, and especially the work you're doing as well. It's affected.
Well, it's amazing where I work in Chile. The visual difference, even within a decade, on some of the glaciers is astounding. How much they've gone back. There's no denying that they are receding quite quickly. It's a shame that when they carve into the water, it's pretty spectacular. But it's not good.
But no, I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate obviously your time and everything. So, if you want to plug everything, like where people can find you, your business, and all that, and then I've got one final question for you after you've done that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you want to follow my adventures, you can find me on willcopestake.com or at Will Copestake on Instagram and Facebooks and all that sort of jazz. Or you can find my business at kayaksummerisles.com or kayak.summerisles in social media.
Amazing. So the final question that I have for you is, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, that's quite a good question. Positively.
Love it.
I think the ultimate goal in life is to finish being thought of well by those that you love and care for, I think.
Absolutely. All right, thank you so much for coming on, mate. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Real Lives podcast. Obviously, it's the new year, so I've had a little break over Christmas. I appreciate everyone being on standby with the new episodes and all that. But yeah, make sure to like, subscribe, share the podcast, all that bullshit that everyone asks you to do. And I really appreciate the support. And there's more and more amazing guests coming on over the next few weeks. So I hope you enjoy those, and I'll see you next Monday for another episode.